Aloha and welcome to Wind in Your Hair. Guaranteed no BS, real breakthroughs, raw truth on mindset, love, sex, purpose, and so much more. This is about getting wind in your hair, getting unstuck, being free, and stepping fully into who you were meant to be, starting right now. Aloha and welcome to Wind in Your Hair. I'm Anna, your host, and today we have Mike deMaine. So Mike is the host of Honesty on Fire. It's a podcast you've got to check out, and he's a sports marketer. And today we're going to be talking about lying, honesty, truth, all of those things and more. So let's dive in. But welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here. I think if everybody was honest, they would admit that they struggle with in various ways at various times and almost every day in some way, one way or another.
Where are you calling in from?
So I'm in San Diego. Love California, but I grew up on the East Coast and then have been on the West Coast now for about the last 7 or 8 years with a few little work stints that send me east from time to time.
Mm-hmm. So tell me in a summary about Honesty on Fire.
Sure. Well, Honesty on Fire, we started the podcast because we wanted to start to have kind of frank and open discussions about the struggles, to be honest, to live genuinely, to live kind of authentically, and to do it not just in relationships, but really with yourself. I think the thing that you, like all addictions, I think the thing that everybody struggles with is that to get better at one thing or another, it really has to be kind of self-centered. And when people think that they have a problem with honesty or their family members or their partners or their work colleagues say, hey, you really need to be more honest about this. The way to get better is almost counterintuitive to the affliction diagnosis from their friends. So like they would say that you struggle being selfish or that you make decisions selfishly. And really the path to getting better is really focusing on yourself first and then kind of going from there. It's hard because I think whether you're an alcoholic or you struggle with drugs or you gamble or you struggle being honest, it's hard to get to the point where you have to admit that you really need to focus on it.
So when you talk about focusing on yourself, it's probably the same thing that when I talk about, I tell my clients is to really heal that relationship to yourself. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think that and it's hard because anybody that comes to our support groups, in Anonymous or look for help, in a coaching environment, they come because they're in a traumatic situation. They've lied to the partner. They've sometimes cheated on their partner. They've made a really bad decision at work. And they're coming because they want to save the relationship. They want to save the job. They want to save the, chance to be back with this person. And you can have some success doing that, but ultimately you're not going to be successful until you're truly doing it for yourself to get better. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard thing for people to grasp because your timeline to improving yourself, to getting better is your own timeline. People are not going to forgive you. They're not going to believe you. They're not going to kind of have trust back in you on a time frame that you want. It's going to be on their time frame. So you have to do it for yourself on your timeline. You have to make the right decisions day after day after day, moment after moment for yourself. And then you kind of have to not worry about what others are thinking, mm-hmm. talking, or maybe considering about you. And that's a hard concept for people to grasp.
And also, that makes me think of, I was just talking to a client the other day about how you cannot, first of all, force anyone to change. Some people, I used to think that I could change my ex-husband and to stop doing certain things. And even though I had good motives, you still cannot change someone. And when they say they're going to change for you, that's a red flag for me.
Right. I completely agree. You can't control anything other than yourself. And that is so hard for people to do because they want to control the outcomes of life. They want to do things with the expectation that we're going to get something back. And I think we talked a little bit about faith beforehand. Like you can't control God's plan for you. You can have a plan for yourself, but ultimately the rewards and the timeline to which you're going to receive those rewards, it's not in your control. And you may have this concept of how it's going to be and how it's going to turn out. But the reality is, if you put your faith and obedience in the plan and you put those plans in actions, God will deliver something better than you ever could have imagined. And that's also very hard for people to act day by day after that, with the idea that they may have this idea of what they want, but what they'll end up getting is better, even though it may not be the same picture in their mind that they saw.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit to what you said, because I think that's interesting. So when I mentioned red flags, you said that none of us have all of them. What was that you said?
Well, I try not to think maybe it's the empathetic part of me, maybe it's the underdog kind of coaching in me, but I try not to think of red flags and green flags in people, just because I think that we all have both, right? Like, I think, yeah, I have certain things. Like, if I started talking on a first date with somebody about how I lead a podcast about dealing with honesty, and I lead a couple groups a week with Liars Anonymous, the potential prospects, they're going to run for the hills, right? So to me, that's a red flag in a way. But then when you start to dive into it, it becomes a green flag. Like, this is the focus of my life, right? So I think if we approach relationships and approach ourselves really with the idea that, look, I've got these weaknesses I have to work on, and these strengths, these are red, these are green, whatever they are, I think we need to try to make them all aspects. So, like, to me, I think one of the pre-questions you sent was like, what inspires me to talk about honesty? The fact that I really struggled with it for so long in so many different ways. And so it became a thing where, like, if I'm struggling with being honest and just dealing with people, I'm gonna make it my mission to be really good at it. And am I good at it? I'm better. I know more about what drives people and whatever, but I'm still, just like everybody else, a work in progress. And so I think, it's like working out. It's a muscle that you have to work out.
So this is the difference. I realize I teach on red flags a lot, because that is how you vet people. That's how you save your time. That's how you spare yourself from pain and suffering, from ending up in a wrong relationship. It's interesting because you use the word weakness. So flags are different from weaknesses. Everybody has weaknesses, and flags are a personal thing, though. My red flags may not be your red flags, but the flags are what we value. Weaknesses are something else, like our flaws that we have to work on. So for me, what I value is somebody who's drug-free and who's honest and, let's say, adventurous, right? So if I go on a date with somebody and I see that he's not honest, that to me is a red flag. Yes, that's also his weakness, but let's say he's not adventurous. He likes to sit on his ass and watch TV. To somebody else, that may not be a red flag, and that's not necessarily his weakness. For me, it's a red flag that he maybe is not a man of faith. It doesn't mean it's a weakness of his, but flags are so important for people to understand what their values are and to learn not to compromise. So that makes me think of different types of honesty or dishonesty. I have a pet peeve with people trying to find loopholes. They're not telling you a lie, but they're purposely not telling you the truth. They're withholding information. It's like what you said. Did you work out today? Oh yeah, I went to the gym. But maybe they went to the gym and they sat on, a bike, and they didn't actually move their legs, but they got distracted on social media for 30 minutes or like on a phone call or something. So they went to the gym, but they didn't actually work out, right?
Right. Well, I think you see that in relationships, like, husband, wife, or partners, or whatever they may be. It's like, did you take care of paying this bill that I asked you to take care of? And I think what happens is because the partner wants to be perfect or make it look like they have kind of their act together, they'll say that they did when they hadn't, and then they'll say, okay, well, in my head, I am going to do it, but I haven't done it. But I'm going to avoid a conflict or to avoid feeling the heat, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say that I did it, and then I'm going to do it in an hour. That's being dishonest. And when you start to pile those things on top of each other, they add up. And then that leads to other forms of dishonesty that are much more damaging in relationships.
Mm-hmm. So did you explain to me why you started Honesty on Fire?
I don't know, not really. And I think the goal for me with that was to, again, I think 16 or 17 months ago, I went through a really tough breakup. There's blame on both sides. I was not being completely honest about different things that I was doing. I mean, I'm faithful. I wasn't cheating, but I was not being honest about my actual financial situation. I wasn't being honest about certain interviews and jobs and things that I was going on. So I was trying to make myself look better and had my kind of shit together more than I actually did. And so that was part of it. And then my partner was alcoholic and verbally abusive and emotionally abusive. So I was trying to basically please a partner that was very difficult to please. And so it just was a toxic situation. So when that relationship broke up, and it's not the first one that I struggled with, being honest. And part of it is I was very successful in my career, but I think there's a lot of times you're like, once you reach a certain point of success, you feel you have to always be at that same level of success. Your partners kind of are holding you to that level of success. And sometimes it's just not possible. Sometimes for reasons you're not getting there. And so I kind of felt that pressure, and those pressures led to a really nasty breakup, and me being dishonest was a big thing that I was kind of being talked about amongst the friend circle. And I said, you know what, I'm tired of this. I'm going to make honesty my biggest asset. If these people, these friends, these family members are really criticizing some of my things, I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to make sure that I'm, a leader. And sometimes, and it's not an easy thing to do, to go on a podcast and say, look, I struggled with telling truth. I'm a liar in this situation. I am not genuine in these situations, and to talk about it openly. It's not a scarlet letter you want to put on yourself, really. But that being said, I thought it was important because when I'm doing that, I'm a much better person. I have all the weight of the shame and the embarrassment and the fear is all gone. And then, then for me, it allowed me to deal with a better sense of worth, and then it helped others at the same time. So that was the goal. We started to have different specialties come in, and people come in and talk about narcissistic abuse or emotional trauma or anxiety and panic. And so to me, it's become an opportunity for us to focus on a lot of the different things that people struggle with in relationships, and not just romantic relationships, work relationships, friendships, parental relationships, that type of thing.
I used to not have this mindset, but how the most difficult, painful, dark points in your life can be used for good. And like hearing your story, that you were so dishonest that you finally realized that you were tired of living that way. So you started a podcast on honesty. If you had not been dishonest and hurt your ex as much as you did, or you said you both, it takes two to tango, right? So you may not have decided to start that podcast, right? If you hadn't struggled with it.
I'll call it an addiction. I think that lying is a behavior less than an addiction of ways, but it's an addictive behavior, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I think that anytime you struggle with anything, until it puts you in a situation that is so uncomfortable that you have no alternatives but to change, then you don't make a change. I was, for a course of, 10 or 12 years, I was, making decisions that were, I'll say, that were selfish. I was making them because my self-worth and my self-esteem was so low that I was making them because I felt like it had to be something that I wasn't at that time, because prior to that, I had kind of reached, really good career highs. And so as somebody who's struggling with that, they're in it and they're trying to find a way out of it. And until they hit rock bottom 1, 2, 3, 4, however many times it takes to hit, and where it's like, hey, I can't do this anymore, they change. And it's the same with alcoholism. It's the same with narcotics. It's the same with gambling. I think until people get to a point where they're so discomfortable, the alternative is almost death. I'm not saying I was at that point, but it's like you've lost kind of everything. You have to make a change. And so that's kind of where I was. And I had to, I've had to rebuild a lot of relationships. I've had to put some relationships on hold that I still want to have, and I've had to let go of some. And it's just, unfortunately, that's part of rebuilding yourself. But at the same time, a lot of those relationships, whether it was a romantic relationship or a friendship or a work relationship, a lot of those are toxic along the way. And they aren't good for you because you're trying to make them happy and they're never going to be happy. You're trying to be something to somebody that you're never going to be. And so you have to really examine yourself and find that peace and confidence in yourself and kind of almost simplify your life to make yourself better. And to say that I've healed from it is really it's not a true statement. I think this is something I have to work on it every day. It's a continual healing process and I'll be better. But to say that I'll ever be healed, I think is a little bit of a misstatement, although that is obviously the goal.
Yeah, well, none of us will arrive this side of heaven. So we'll always be working on stuff, always letting go of stuff. And for me, though, I would never be where I am today if I had not gone through the difficult marriage that I went through. I used to have so much light and life in me, and people would always say, Anna, God's going to do something big with your life. And I remember that. But then at the 13 years I was married, I felt completely hollow and invisible and unimportant and unseen. And then it was only though, I love that quote that says, change only comes when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. And so I realized I wanted to change. I freed myself and I worked on myself. I rescued myself because I knew no one else was coming to rescue me. I wanted to turn around and help people who were in the same situations. My point is like good things can come from really bad situations if you let it.
No, they absolutely can. And I think, to your point, I mean, I think when you're in those situations, you are not, when you're in them, you can't quite see them as clearly as you can either when you're looking back or when others are kind of giving you advice. Because I think you're just like people that come to our group, people want to save their relationship, but they have a hard time seeing that their partner may be toxic for them, or that their traits aren't aligned in the right direction, or that they're in an abusive situation, because every relationship starts with some sort of love present, whether that love is genuine or not. I think there's narcissistic experts that would debate that a narcissist can't ever actually love. But, I think that everybody starts with the idea that this is like the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. And that may last for a while, but sometimes when it doesn't, it's really hard to kind of admit that you put a year, 5, 10, 15 years into something that wasn't fulfilling really in the end.
So if we're talking about honesty, we want to talk about your history of lying, basically, like how, because you struggle, you would say one of your biggest struggles was lying. So kind of like, have you been lying since you were a child? Why do you think you lied so much?
No, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, and I think for me personally, I think I was, growing up, I was a straight and narrow kid. I never lied. I even in high school football, we had team rules and my teammates broke the rules. And as a team captain, I turned them in when that was not an easy decision to make. So I was always early in my life making the right kind of moral decisions, for lack of a better word. And then, through my marriage, I did the same thing. I'm not a cheater. I'm not a person that was, unfaithful to my partners. When I went through the divorce with my kid's mom, I had reached a status in my career where I had done well, financially well, relatively, just career-wise, advancement-wise, had done well. And then struggled for a couple of years to kind of get back to that spot after I kind of, had a career shift. And so that created really poor decision-making in my part. I was in relationships kind of back to back to back that I shouldn't have been in. I didn't take time to heal from the divorce into, the next part of life, which I think, a lot of people struggle with. I think they get out of an unhealthy relationship and then jump into like the next great thing that feels like love, but it maybe isn't really love. It's more lust. And so I was in that rut a lot. And I made a lot of, I churned and burned through 4 or 5 different relationships and, was making a lot of bad decisions, was trying to be something I wasn't, was, inflating my kind of personal status, whether that was acting as if I had more money or just using credit or borrowing money to kind of get by, and live a lifestyle that I really shouldn't have been living. So I was making a lot of those poor choices and I'm, flat out misrepresenting myself to these romantic partners. So I think that after this last relationship kind of blew up for fall on both sides, the last 15 or 16 months have really focused on myself in a way that I should have done 10 or 12 years ago. I think we could get into specific lies. I lied about almost everything. It's funny when I host the podcast or some of these self-help groups, so many different people come with so many different lies. And I find myself saying, yeah, I lied about this in that situation. Or yes, I misrepresented myself the same way in this situation. Or yes, I can completely relate to making something up in that situation. So I think our group, aside from myself, which I had to fix myself, our groups allow people to realize that they're not the only person out there that's struggling with it, and that they can help each other kind of help themselves, or help themselves help each other, if that makes sense.
I think that's interesting that you said turning and burning, because what a lot of people don't understand when you're not into personal growth and your focus is not healing yourself, that when you are toxic, when I say toxic, it's like basically unhealthy, because you haven't been working on yourself. You still have childhood wounds you haven't healed from. You've got probably negative patterns, these loops that you keep getting in, whether it's lying or addiction or being complacent, which is a big problem. And when you're not investing in yourself, you're going to attract that. I refer to people as high value people. It doesn't mean that if you're not high value, you don't have value. But I'm talking about the people who live like they know they have value, so they make really good decisions that edify their lives, and the people who live like they don't have high value, right? So if you live in a world where you don't think you have high value, you're not going to align with somebody who knows that they have high value or lives like that. So unhealthy attracts unhealthy, because for me personally, if a guy came up to me and wanted to date, but he didn't have good habits, he didn't have high values, he didn't have high standards, I'm not going to align with that. So I'm going to pass him right by. And that is basically the crux of how unhealthy attracts unhealthy. So if you want to attract healthy, thriving people in your life, you've got to be healthy and thriving yourself, or they're going to pass you by.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's key. I mean, we kind of joked before we started recording that I think that you start to learn these lessons later in life. I wish I had taken time to learn, or to really focus on myself, maybe is better way to say it, 10 or 12 years ago. Not because I regret the relationship. Aside from me making bad choices and some of my partners, making bad choices in the relationship, we're all really good people. We just were making poor decisions at times when we should have focused on ourselves. We should have allowed ourselves to heal. We should have been in situations that we were more prepared for than we were at the time.
I have so many questions I have to ask you. I want to dive into more lying and stuff, but really quick, tell me about this group that meets 6 days a week. That's about honesty, truth, and lying.
Yeah, so it's a group that's called Liars Anonymous. It was formed in the middle of COVID by one guy who was struggling with, honesty, and he couldn't find an anonymous group that focused specifically on lying and honesty. There was Alcoholics Anonymous, there's Gambling Anonymous, there's Narcotics Anonymous, there's Sex Addicts Anonymous. There's all of these anonymouses, and all of them have pieces of lying in them, but they didn't talk specifically about lying. And so he started a group in COVID, had one person. I think my first session, I was towards the end of COVID when I went to the first one. And I think our first meeting, we had 8 people on the Monday or Wednesday night. And now we have 60 people 6 or 7 times a week. They meet every night but Friday, and a couple Saturday and Sunday morning meetings as well. Some women's groups, some support groups. And so it's people from all over the world. We have people in Australia and London and that are logging in because they're struggling. Usually, like I said, because of a relationship that has gotten to the point where like their partner said, you've got to fix this or else. And so they've gone searching and they found our group.
Right. Do you lead these groups personally?
I lead 2 of the 6 sessions. I lead a Monday night group and then a Saturday morning group.
Well, I have a little bit of experience going to recovery programs. So have you ever heard of Celebrate Recovery?
I have not.
Oh, okay. So, well, first, let me back up. So right before COVID, a girlfriend invited me to Al-Anon, which is a recovery program for family members of alcoholics. So I ended up going to that.
I've been to that.
I realized that I was dealing with somebody who would not stop drinking for anything or anyone, and it was ruining our marriage. So I was going to Al-Anon for a little while, then COVID hit, and I didn't want to do Zoom, so I stopped going. But then in the middle of COVID, I heard about Celebrate Recovery, which is a Christ-centered recovery program for people with hurts, hangups, and habits. And so I didn't go to Celebrate Recovery for years because I thought you had to have an addiction. And I haven't struggled with addiction, aside from the addiction of anger. Like, I'm an 8 on the Enneagram, so when we're triggered, I think you might be too, but when we're triggered, we're prone to become angry, not guilty, not shameful, not anxious. And so I was so angry, especially during my marriage, because I didn't know what I was dealing with. I couldn't change the situation. I would say, let's go do this. This will help our marriage. Let's go do that. Nothing worked. I tried everything under the sun. And so I became very angry. I would be so angry that we just kept buying the beer and wouldn't stop drinking. And every date, every staycation, every anniversary was ruined because of alcohol. And So through Celebrate Recovery, I realized I didn't have to be angry, and that when I am angry, I'm giving away my power and I'm letting their behavior dictate mine. But I wanted to ask you, you said you coach athletes, actors, and musicians and to help them be more honest. Tell me about that.
It's been clients. I mean, I do life coaching. I mean, I hate to say it's life coaching because it makes it sound like I'm certified. I do kind of mentoring is maybe a better way to say it, but I do have some athletes and some.
Do you get
I do. I do.
So you can't be a
I do.
mentor because mentorship is free. And so wait, let's deal with this for a second. Do you?
Sure.
Why don't you call yourself a life coach?
Well, I feel like it's a kind of a generic term. I think that it's a term that gets overused maybe in times that it isn't necessarily applicable.
Narcissism?
I mean, yeah, exactly. I think it's kind of become an adjective that isn't necessarily applicable. But so I do mentor / life coach some athletes and some actors, and same type of struggles that we talked about a little bit. And the challenge that they have is they're in these high performing careers where they're expected to be this person every day, all the time. They're always expected to be on top of their game, and that's a hard thing for people in roles because they just it becomes their identity when their identity is really so much deeper than that. And so I work with them on one, just kind of being there for them and having somebody for them to lay out their challenges, their struggles, what they're thinking through, to talk through situations.
Yeah. So I'm a relationship coach. I'm not licensed, but therapists and almost like opposite, because therapists really help you deal with the past. They go backwards. More coaching is forward movement. Like we keep them accountable. We take their hand. We help them set goals. We help them reach it. It's more like forward movement. And so I know that that's the gift God is giving me to help people, and just the 8 in me, the challenger. I've always known that
absolutely.
To level up.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think that it's like a kind of a calling in life. Like I kind of came through the struggles that I've come through and was blessed with the thought or the desire to kind of turn those struggles into, an achievement, at least an achievement of mine that I can help kind of pass on to others. And so, and I am very, as you mentioned, kind of forward thinking. How do you take what you have now and move forward? I mean, I have 3 rules in trying to get better in honesty, and it really applied in coaching and in life and all those things. So I think they're applicable to getting better in life. And I tell them to all of my people. They're 1, don't squeeze onto anything too tight. 2, don't look back. And 3, don't time travel. Like, don't go forward. Like, you focus on today, and today is what you can control and what you can change, and that's you can control yourself.
I love that. Let's jump into the next question. How do you help someone go from hiding behind the lies to standing in truth without fear?
Well, kind of like I just talked. I mean, I think they have to decide that the truth is the most important thing to them, and they have to decide to, as much as it hurts, as much as it's going to be uncomfortable, as much as they, don't want to live in a doesn't feel good, they have to make honesty the most important thing. And that's the thing that everybody struggles with. Usually lie, unless they're cheating or whatever. They're usually lying day to day because they don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation. They don't want to have a moment that doesn't feel good, that everything isn't smooth, and they want to try to make everybody happy. Very people pleasery, very, let's make sure that everything is perfect when it's just not ever going to be. And that's just trying to control something that is uncontrollable. And so I think, again, it's back to, we try not to get people to squeeze onto the current situation too tight, because when you do, you end up squeezing the life out of whatever it is, whether it's a job, whether it's a relationship, whether it's just a situation. You end up squeezing too hard, and nothing ever happens the way you want to. You can't control anything. The only person that controls what happens is God, and even the plans that he has are greater than in that moment that you're trying to control. So you can't control it. You can't change anything that happened yesterday. You can learn from it, and you can make better decisions because of it. But what's happened has happened, and then you can't change what's going to happen tomorrow. So that's the way to try to get people living honestly in the moment. And you have to motivate them, and they have, what it's a process. They can make the decision to do it. We all work out, and you don't see the efforts of your effort to work out immediately. You may feel it a little bit more the first week or two, but ultimately over time, you'll look back and you're like, man, I'm way fitter than I was 12 months ago. But if you lined up your progress, it'd be very small steps to get to where you see. But when you look back, at the end, it's a much greater distance you've traveled.
That's a huge mindset shift that I've had in my life. So I'm the type of person that I want to take big strides fast. I want to write down 20 things on my to-do list and conquer them all in one day. And it's literally only in the past year probably that I'd realized baby steps, Aaron, is the key. Like tiny steps consistently brings so much more growth and success than trying to take one big step a week.
I mean, obedience is such a hard thing to do. And obedience to whatever your goal is and putting the effort into that goal it's so hard for people. But if you want it and want it bad enough, whatever it is repeated effort day after day after day, time after time after time.
Right. Like for me too, anyone who's trying to be on a workout journey, I changed the way I worked out at least a year ago. I was doing a lot of cardio. Bar did change my body for sure, but I was doing a lot of cardio and I was going to the gym and I noticed everybody on the cardio side was softer than the people on the weightlifting side. I'm like, wait a minute, I think I'm on the wrong side of the gym. Like I need to stop doing so much cardio, which I thought would burn fat, and move over to the weightlifting side, because it's really when you lift weights that you're really burning fat, right? And so once I started lifting more weights, my body changed so much drastically, and certain goals that I have on different body parts, I'm like, wow, okay, it's been a year and I'm really seeing results. And I just think, okay, this is longer than I would have liked to see. But if I wouldn't have started last year, I wouldn't be where I am today. And so that's a hard thing for me to wrap my head around, is like, okay, give yourself a goal 6 months from now. Anyone who wants to lose weight or get more ripped, set yourself a goal 6 months from now or a year from now. And if this is where I want to be, then start today. Because if you never start, you will 100% never get there.
There was Mel Robbins had Carl Lentz on her podcast a month or so ago, and he had a quote, or he said that in my case, I've taken 52 years to program myself to make all the decisions I made to this point. And I'm not saying all of them were horrible over time, but when you've become so used to operating in one way, you have to give yourself, in essence, the same amount of time to reprogram yourself to where you're operating a completely different way.
I want to connect to what I said about the weightlifting part, in case it went over somebody's head, was that it's just like telling the truth or learning to be honest. It's baby steps, living every single day intentionally, making just one better decision today than you did yesterday. I have definitely struggled with being honest throughout my life. I'd say I have bigger weaknesses and fish to fry than honesty. But for me, I realized I had to go through this little season of honesty because there was something I did that I am ashamed of, not proud to admit. And that whole experience really humbled me. And I wanted to talk about what you and I were talking about before we went live, is that there's a verse in the Bible that says, everything concealed will be disclosed. Nothing will be hidden that will not one day eventually come to light. And that verse haunts me. When I'm tempted to not be honest and try to find a loophole and get myself out of a sticky situation where I put myself in, I think about that verse and I think, okay, I can lie about it now, but it's going to come to the surface at one point. And I'm going to look like even more of an ass, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a saying that when you are dishonest, you're basically paying for a credit card that's going to raise interest when the truth comes out, right? Like you can pay cash and tell the truth now, or you can pay in a credit card, and when you end up paying, it's going to hurt a lot more down the line, right? It's hard because it is hard. Like for us, the struggle. Like there are times still, and I've been working on this chart for 2 years, maybe more. Really hard. There are still times where like something will come up and I'll notice myself like, okay, I was going to be dishonest, or I wasn't going to give the full truth there. I wasn't going to be, completely transparent. And I find myself in those situations thinking it now, where before I would have like almost automatically said, well, this is the way it really is. And when it wasn't, right? And so I think you start to catch yourself in those situations, because then you're like, okay, if I say the wrong thing, or if like somebody sends me a text and I could kind of reason it away, I'm like, no, I'm just going to be honest now, and the consequences are going to be what they're going to be. And, so again, it's like paying in cash. I mean, when you pay in cash, it is what it is. Like, there's nothing to worry about after that. Telling the truth, you don't have to worry about what's coming down the line. Anything other than truth, as you mentioned, eventually will come out, and you'll eventually have to answer for it. And what happens with people that really struggle with the truth is they won't tell the truth completely at the start, and then the weight of not telling the truth at the start becomes greater and greater because they are trying to keep their original truth true when it's just not possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. You talk about the stigma of lying and how it's dangerous to label someone a liar. Can you dive into that?
People are quick to label people one thing or another. We all struggle with something. I struggle with honesty. I have a friend who struggles with alcohol. I have others that struggle with body image. To me, I think we all sin in different ways, and I think we owe it to each other to be empathetic towards the people in our lives. Being dishonest in your life is a struggle for people, and they're doing it because they're afraid they're not enough. They're ashamed of something that they've done, or they feel like somebody's expecting something of them when they're not capable of doing it. And so I think it's hard. I mean, we call ourselves liars in the group because we are, but I think to say that somebody's a liar is almost condescending. So
it wasn't until I read something that I realized how damaging it is to label people. And once I started to implement that into my life, just to remove the labels and to talk more about their behavior than their person, basically, you can tell someone that they can do better without calling them lazy. I quote says, you can't correct until you connect, basically. And so for me, I was doing too much correcting because of my parenting style is more authoritarian than authoritative, which is a difference. And so I needed to connect with children more. And even the slightest little label is damaging to their psyche.
You're right. I mean, I think it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? They start to hear you saying that you're lazy, that you're a liar, that you're, whatever, bully. They start to become that, right? If you start to kind of turn it around, like, hey, let's work on getting this better, and then you're kind of leading them as opposed to dictating to them. They start to work on their issues and get better at it. Lament. I think, like we said, it's when you have kids that you're, in our heads, we all tend to let our own anxiety pour out when at times it's kids and people that we're leading need our positive reinforcements as opposed to our negative reinforcements.
So I used to also label myself in different ways. I would tell myself, you're an idiot. Like, why would you say something like that? Why would you do something like that? And I would ruminate and be embarrassed about certain things that I did or said. And I didn't think it was a big deal to label myself and say, oh, I'm so bad at remembering names, or I'm so not smart, whatever it is. And I realized, like you said, it's self-prophesying. Like, I realized how powerful the mind is and how powerful the tongue is. And I started to change that in my life a few years ago. And I will not, it's one of my rules. I do not speak to myself any negative labels at all. I only speak to myself positive labels, like I'm focused, confident, capable, and consistent. I'm great at remembering names, and now I'm phenomenal at remembering names. And so the same with my children, is I never speak anything negative to them anymore. But it's been a long process of transitioning from that into being, I guess, negative label free.
We're our own worst enemies, right? Like we have to deal with our thoughts all day long, right? I think I read somewhere or heard somewhere that, I think we have like 12,000 independent thoughts a day, and 80% of them are negative. I mean, that's a huge number of negative thoughts. Like, so we're battling that in our head every day. And so I think, like you said, if the four of us know what we struggle with, but it takes a mindset shift in our own head to say, look, okay, I know that I'm weak in these areas. It's okay for me to be weak. Like I think we think in our heads that we have to be perfect because everybody else is perfect. Those people that have all the great stuff, they're struggling with something. They're just not putting whatever that something is out there for us to see. So all we see is the perfect life. And so in our own heads, we're like, man, everybody else is perfect. I'm the one that's screwed up. Like, I'm not making enough money. I don't have this. I don't have that. And so it creates this lie in our head that we are telling ourselves that we're not good enough, that we have to be this or we have to do that. And we just have to be ourselves. And for us to just be ourselves is what anybody in our orbit wants. And that's the hardest thing for us to do. And that is really what I see most in people that come to our groups, is because they think that they have to be somebody that they aren't. And that is really hard for people to realize that we all have our own talents, and my talents may be different than yours, and yours are different than your neighbors. And we just have to be good at being us, and the right people will accept us for that. And we don't have to be something different. And then like you said before, if my green flags align with what you're looking for, then I'm your guy. If my red flags are what you're seeing, then I'm not your guy. And that's okay. Either way is okay. We have to be confident that if we're ourselves, the people that are meant to be around us will be there.
I heard this quote recently that patience is protection. And so I apply it to my relationship coaching. Yeah. It's like, you will protect yourself if you be patient and you don't dive into another relationship right after you end one. And if you pay attention to the red flags and you're patient enough to not just commit to something without healing yourself. And I wanted to comment on what you said, that sometimes it's the hardest thing for us to be ourselves. And I kind of realized, I'm like, oh my God, okay, when you get to a place of real healing, I don't want to say this without sounding vain, but it's easy to be me. Now, I don't want to be anybody else. Right. That's only because I suffered so much for so many years with church shame and toxic relationships and other things that I realized when I got through the healing. I hired my own life coach. I've been in therapy. I know how to coach myself. I realized when you get to a place where you're okay being alone, you know your purpose in life, what the plan that God has for you, you're in good hands. You know who you are and whose you are, right? When you get to a good place like that, you realize, I don't want to be anybody else. You're right. A lot of people don't have that mindset, but that's because a lot of people don't invest the time and the energy into working on themselves, right?
Right. I think the challenge is that people forget that living in peace and calm in your orbit is what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to be in situations that are stressful, that are toxic, that are destroying who you are. We, for whatever reason, whether it's a job or a relationship or even just ourselves sometimes, like we allow ourselves to live in such chaos and we find comfort in the chaos, when the reality is that there's really no comfort, and it's causing us to make bad decisions. It's causing us to be in situations we shouldn't be in. And we have to really learn that the key to our peace is calmness, and calmness of mind, calmness of spirit, calmness of action. And we have to put ourselves in situations that are going to be that. And those situations, when you start to put yourself into those, feel so strange, so uncomfortable. But then slowly over time, when you get to the peaceful spot, you're not worried about what you're missing out. You're not worried about, I didn't go to this party that I was invited to and I'm going to miss on, right? Like all of a sudden you're like, man, I'm just happy with my comfy blanket and myself and the sunset. You know what I mean? Like, it's a weird feeling. And I think that we don't get used to it until a certain point in life. I wish that I had figured it out 20 years ago, because it would have saved a lot of drama. But at the same time, I'm meant to figure it out now and to try to help people do the same.
Yeah, that is definitely so true. It's hard not to be like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have started 20 years ago. I would be so much more far along in my life, but it's better late than never, right?
The second half is the best half.
Right. Oh, that's what I was going to say, was peace has become so vital and precious to my life. I love the fact that now I have peace in my life, whereas I didn't have a lot of peace before because I was trying to live life all by myself. Right? I thought I could figure it all out. I thought that I didn't need God. And when I finally reached out and surrendered, like, okay, I can't do this on my own anymore. I do need peace. And what I tell my clients too is to be able to attract someone in your life who adds peace and energy and value to your life and who doesn't take away from it. And something that you said earlier, it made me think of my favorite quote, which is, discipline is the difference between choosing what you want now and what you want most. And this applies to lying. When you think about your goal of being honest, what you want now might be to get yourself out of this lie. or to find a loophole or to tell a half truth or to withhold information. But what you want most is to be an honest person and to build confidence, right? And so this brings me to the confidence thing, what you said earlier about confidence. I say this all the time, that building confidence is keeping the promises to yourself.
Right. Life's hard because selflessness does not mean that you can't do things for yourself. You can't keep your priorities yourself. You can't have boundaries that make yourself successful. Like, I think we all think of boundaries as something that people are trying to keep us away from things or whatever. It's really to protect, like, we're supposed to have our own boundaries to protect our own sanity. And even when other people have boundaries, those are actually meant to do the same thing for us. There's this negative connotation about them that, I mean, they're peacekeepers. And so, I think we struggle with the idea that selfishness for ourselves is a bad thing. And I think that selfishness done wrong, obviously, there are things that are selfish acts, but taking care of yourself is not one.
So would you say also the root of lying, though, is selfishness?
Self-preservation is what the root of lying is. And to me, it is selfish to a degree, but to me, most lies are done to protect yourself from some feeling. And that feeling is usually a traumatic feeling that you have experienced or you're afraid to experience. So fear, shame, embarrassment, guilt, not being enough, like those are the reasons that you're lying. And to me, it's to say it's selfish, I think it's more self-preservation and it is selfish, if that makes sense.
Yes. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Mike. Where can people find you?
People can find us at Honesty on Fire, or they can find Liars Anonymous at liarsanonymous.org. They're meeting 6 days a week. Great resource for people that are trying to live honest, and really appreciate you having me.
Thank you so much for listening. And if you're ready to get unstuck and create the love and the life that you can't stop thinking about, then let's chat. You can book a call with me below. And don't forget, you deserve better. And get some freaking wind in your hair.